The first thing that often unsettles Australians in Canada is the atmosphere of quiet restraint that settles over public life. It appears immediately in the way streets feel, the way people speak, and the strange sense that everything has been dialed a few degrees lower than the familiar rhythms of Australian cities. What stands out is not cold weather or foreign accents, but a social climate shaped by understatement and politeness that creates a kind of invisible buffer around everyday interactions. This contrast becomes most striking in places where Australians expect lively informality but instead meet a calm, almost choreographed sense of public order. The difference is subtle but powerful, creating the unmistakable feeling that life here moves according to another emotional register entirely. Australians tend to notice first how measured the Canadian social atmosphere is. Conversations at cafes unfold quietly, lines at stores remain orderly even during busy hours, and disagreements dissolve before gaining momentum. The environment rewards gentle tones and long pauses rather than quick banter or bold humour. For many Australians, accustomed to a culture shaped by easy laughter, loud friendliness, and direct communication, this level of calm can feel both comforting and disorienting. Streets seem clean in a way that suggests collective maintenance, and public behaviour leans heavily on consideration rather than spontaneity. Even the landscape reinforces the mood. Vast forests, soft winter skies, and wide suburban spaces create a backdrop in which people seem to move deliberately, as though trying not to disturb the harmony around them. These impressions deepen as the cultural differences become more visible. Australians often come from social environments where informality is a baseline, where warmth is expressed through teasing, and where hierarchy dissolves quickly in favour of relaxed equality. In Canada, the same equality exists, but it carries a layer of formality that rarely drops. The politeness is genuine, yet it is also structural, a collective expectation that emotions should stay moderated and that personal boundaries must remain intact. Risk-taking is tempered, enthusiasm is softened, and conflict is approached with an almost ritualized caution. This creates a society where people are friendly but slightly guarded, where emotional safety is prioritized over bold expression, and where community norms rely on predictable social behavior in daily life. These differences appear in small but symbolic interactions. Neighbors wave with polite smiles but seldom initiate deeper conversation unless invited. Slowly over time, co-workers exchange warmth through consistency rather than humor, offering support through reliability instead of expressive camaraderie. Retail staff speak with steady tones and careful phrasing, making each interaction feel both courteous and somewhat scripted. Public transportation remains quiet, even during rush hour, as passengers maintain an unspoken agreement to preserve each other's personal space. For Australians used to casual chatter on buses, open laughter in public spaces, and friendships that form quickly through shared jokes, this atmosphere can feel like stepping into a world that values emotional softness over spontaneity. Over time, the contrast becomes even sharper as Australians observe how deeply these habits shape Canadian routines. The pace of life leans toward planning rather than improvisation, and social expectations encourage people to think ahead, prepare thoroughly, and avoid surprises. Community rules, whether about recycling, pet etiquette, or winter parking, are followed with impressive consistency. This creates an environment that feels stable and predictable, but also more cautious than what Australians are used to. The cultural instinct to avoid inconvenience for others becomes a guiding principle, influencing everything from driving styles to small talk. Interactions flow smoothly, yet always with that subtle layer of distance that signals respect rather than familiarity. Typical encounters reflect this emotional architecture. In suburban neighbourhoods, morning commutes happen with quiet efficiency as residents clear snow from driveways in a synchronized rhythm shaped by long winters. At workplaces, meetings begin on time with structured agendas, and discussions emphasize consensus rather than direct confrontation. Even social gatherings often come with gentle boundaries, invitations sent well in advance, clear expectations about timing, and a noticeable attentiveness to others' comfort. Australians commonly interpret these patterns as signs of kindness wrapped in reserve. The communal energy feels steady rather than spirited, defined by careful consideration rather than unfiltered enthusiasm. In moments where spontaneity might flourish in Australia, Canadians lean toward restraint. Barbecue conversations proceed with polite pacing instead of fast humor. Public disagreements are softened through diplomatic phrasing, creating exchanges that remain calm even when opinions diverge. When unexpected situations arise, a delayed bus, a long line, a miscommunication, people respond with muted patience that reveals an ingrained cultural preference for harmony. For Australians, who often navigate similar moments with expressive reactions or humour, this controlled emotional climate can feel both admirable and unfamiliar. These differences begin to shape how Australians interpret the Canadian social landscape. The politeness, once perceived as reserved, gradually reveals itself as a form of social trust. The quietness, initially unsettling, becomes a sign of mutual respect. The structure, which at first seems rigid, transforms into a framework that protects individual comfort in a diverse society. In this way, Canada's emotional cadence subtly influences the mindset of many Australians who spend time there, encouraging a slower rhythm, a softer tone, and a greater sensitivity to the boundaries that outline everyday life. As weeks turn into months, the cultural adjustments settle into something more reflective. Many Australians begin to recognise how Canada's emotional climate shapes the inner life of the people who grow up within it. The steady politeness encourages emotional self-regulation. The measured conversations cultivate attentiveness. The predictable routines build a sense of quiet security. Over time, these elements combine into a worldview centered on caution, patience, and communal stability. The instinct for bold immediacy common in Australian culture softens into a mindset that favours subtlety and deliberation. What initially felt like reserve slowly comes to be understood as a collective decision to maintain social gentleness in a vast, diverse, and often challenging environment. This shift becomes visible in small personal transformations. Many Australians notice their own voices lowering in public, their gestures becoming less expansive, their reactions more contained. They find themselves planning further ahead, speaking with more precision, and adopting the indirect phrasing that smooths everyday communication in Canada. Even their sense of space begins to widen, standing farther apart in lines, lowering the volume during conversations, and developing a new sensitivity to how their presence might affect others. The change is subtle, but it marks a quiet merging with the emotional rhythm around them. As the cultural layers continue to reveal themselves, Canada's influence becomes less about differences and more about perspective. The calm streets, the slow-building friendships, the polite exchanges, and the consistent routines form a social environment that emphasises steadiness over flair. Many Australians eventually view this contrast not as a challenge, but as a lens through which to understand their own culture more deeply. The informal ease of Australian life becomes clearer when set against Canada's measured warmth. The spontaneity of Australian humour stands out more sharply when compared to Canada's restrained friendliness. By the time the cultural adjustment feels complete, a broader insight emerges. Every society builds its emotional climate from the landscapes it inhabits, the histories it carries, and the unspoken agreements it maintains. Canada's quiet harmony, so puzzling at first, becomes a reminder that cultural differences are often subtle shifts in pace and tone rather than dramatic oppositions. In the end, Australians who experience this contrast often come away with a deeper appreciation for how societies shape the ways people move through the world and how, in those differences, there is always a reflection of what makes each place unique. Make sure you've dropped a like and hit that subscribe button. That way the next video will be out as quick as possible.